guess. Well, I mean, this is, I guess, what we're gonna get to. I was gonna ask why we watched it. You obviously. I don't guess we have to get to it.
I guess I can say, it seemed like George was always making sacrifices for other people, like, at the beginning when his brother, fell, into the water, he helped save him, but then ended up having, I guess, hard of hearing from one ear. And then when he was going off to Europe, he wanted to, like, explore the world, but then his, dad passed away, and then when he was gonna go off, he had to stay because of that, and then when he was gonna go off to college, he somehow ended up having to stay to like run his dad's business. So it kind of like seemed like, I don't know if it was just like wrong timing or he was just like always trying to be like responsible and like good guy.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts, comments?
I agree. I think George is a person who just does a lot of self-sacrifice for others, and kind of ignores his own feelings and desires to do so just because he thinks like this is the right thing to do, I should do it. And I think you see at the end when he was like, why do we move here in this house? I think that's when he was finally like beginning to regret all the decisions he made, and wondering if maybe he should have just left to travel the world instead of staying and helping out with the business.
Good, and that was clearly the established dream. I mean, he would share his dreams with anyone who asked, in terms of seeing the world, and he was gonna build this and do that, until he didn't. There was something that you had mentioned I wanted to kind of go with. So hypothetically, let's say that George was with us today in a psychotherapy session with a resident psychologist. We get feedback in terms of doc to doc that he is significantly conflicted and that there's a lot of anger, perhaps even rage. One of us points out that in watching him, observing him, you didn't see that at all. How do we kind of resolve our clinician's report with what we observed? Now, we did see some of it peek through at the end, but the consensus is that, wait a minute, our psychologist has to be wrong because we didn't see the level that she was reporting. What's going on there? I mean, assuming that our psychologist is not lying to us.
Like repression, like a defense mechanism of some kind?
So what defense mechanism do you think might be at play here?
Is it just like repression, isn't it, or suppression?
Possibly. There might be one that's a single best answer, or a better answer here.
Is it sublimation, or they like become positive instead?
It could be. There's one that might be a tweak even better. Altruism. Yeah, altruism. Right. Because I heard self-sacrifice a couple times mentioned here. And while that is true, I think in the context of case formulation, we might see It's a Wonderful Life as a case study of altruism. So then, again, respectfully, our psychologist is reassuring us that we're not off base either. So again, in formulating behavior, very often you'll hear psychiatry, psychology discuss the biopsychosocial factors that contribute to the observed behavior, normal, abnormal, disordered, right? Doesn't matter. Similarly, we could go along with a little bit of a different context of what predisposes to such behaviors, precipitates and perpetuates the behavior. So it's probably a good idea, and if anytime you see a patient, you want to build that 3x3 rubric, retranscribe your notes into each of those 9 boxes, and you get a wonderful visual on how to case formulate. Right? So here, altruism may be a way in which his behaviors are being perpetuated from a psychological, biopsychosocial, a psychological perspective, right? In as much as altruism is a defense mechanism. What happens that results in our observation that this seems to fall apart? Something overwhelms this subconscious mechanism of altruism.
Financial stress, the $8,000.
Okay. Right. I would provide feedback that the family has always been under significant financial stress. So in psychiatry, we always ask, why now? So a little bit more detail about the financial stress.
Wasn't couldn't they think it was him? Weren't they accusing him of being the one stealing it? So like it's kind of like now he's not the good guy.
Well, there was also legal matters for it too.
Yeah, he's going to jail. Yeah, so there is financial stress. That financial stress, embezzlement, it looks as if he is he's responsible, he's going to be going to jail. And Mr. Potter tells him that. All right, so that's a social, perhaps precipitant in terms of identifying this new onset behavior, which might be this subconscious becoming conscious, this anger and disgust and regret. What was it all worth? Why? For what? Because now I'm going to jail, I'm going to prison.
Especially with the comparison of his brother, who like that same day was getting honored by the president, and like all these like things happened.
Yep. Wonderful spin-off is to have the two Bailey brothers. I would love to have seen that one play out. Netflix series, because there's a lot there.
When you think of like predisposing or like precipitating psychological factors too, the dad talks about how you were born older, George. And I think that has a lot to do with like his decision making, and some of the reason that he also is altruistic is that he almost had like this personality from an early age of like maturity or like responsibility, especially over the younger brother.
Yeah, the younger brother, and that's reinforced, we see, because of what happens on the ice. But it's also with an interaction with Mr. Gower and what happens, and that type of personality that ultimately gets built from a very young age. Mm-hmm. Yep. What else did you observe in him?
I feel like, to add to that, I feel like he has the responsibility over his younger brother, but also like a little bit to the community and to the town, because he sort of feels like the only thing standing in the way of Mr. Potter, like owning everything and owning everyone's souls.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's him and struggling with his father's legacy.
Yeah.
What would my father's legacy be if Mr. Potter did buy everything up? Because then his life would have been all for naught. Right? So we see a parallel there. And this is the oldest son living out his father's, protecting, preserving his own father's legacy. And so there's a struggle there too. And at the end, or towards the end, when that seems to be in jeopardy, I'm going to prison, and the name, the Bailey name, is going to be dragged through the mud, and people are going to look upon it differently. Resonates with him. Yep.
I thought there was a bit of social commentary as well. I think this movie was made in the 1940s, so around the time, the end of World War II. And so like Mr. Potter was the ruthless capitalist, the individualist, while Mr. Bailey and his ideals were representing maybe communalism and what it means to be a community and have integrity. And there's like, even within a person, the struggle between doing something for yourself versus doing something for the greater good. And I think that was on display throughout the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think getting back to the behavior that we see in George towards the end of this movie, or at least maybe midway to the end of this movie, when you believe you've self-sacrificed for that good of the community, and the community isn't there to then support you, there's going to be anger and regret. That's what we see actually manifest until, of course, the community, in fact, is there for you.
Yep.
That's the ultimate test, and that's certainly the message at the end of this movie. They are actually very, and by the way, so his brother also comes back. Right? You know, I think this also plays out in his interpersonal relationships. Remember when he's over Mary's house, and Frank Wainwright calls. I mean, that is not typical behavior in terms of what he goes through and what he does. I mean, he has a change of affect, and his behavior certainly becomes maladaptive, to say the least. Right? Some jealousy there, some envy, and again, regret in terms of him not getting in on the bottom floor of that business.
Even the initial like resistance to being with Mary, I think was like a defense against like staying there forever, right? Like he was trying to avoid more reasons to stay, despite like having feelings for her. And I think that kind of speaks to like his inner conflict and turmoil as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. So, at some point in this movie, to rewrite the script, Bailey sees a psychiatrist and/or psychologist, multidisciplinary team. How does the narrative play out differently?
stay the same except for the suicidal ideation. I think that could have maybe have been prevented, because I think talking to someone would have like kept him grounded to his principles and the reason behind like all his actions that he's taken in his life so far.
Mhm.
I think if he was just repeatedly reminded of that, then he wouldn't have like this internal conflict of like what if that he seems to like have throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, the SI is a direct result of hopelessness,
Mhm.
right, which is a major risk factor for suicide. Yep. Anything else?
I think he would have lived differently. I think that like realistically he wasn't engaging in his values as much as he maybe could have benefited from. And if he was able to see like he could actually engage in that right where he is about having to change all of his circumstances, like it's not black and white, that might have really changed his perspective on life and the things that he was doing. He might have spent more time with his kids. He might have spent more time with his family, with his friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I think if he's in therapy, the idea would be he's in therapy for a reason, right? Not just to satisfy a class discussion. And I wonder if he would have drew the conclusion that this defense mechanism of mine can be maladaptive, and it's held me back, and it's causing me dysphoria, anxiety, and maybe the medical field has labeled that. And I think in looking at some flexibility within defense mechanisms, he may have sacrificed some altruism. Remember, defense mechanisms, when they were originally described, Valiant, were often categorized as narcissistic versus immature versus mature. The classification, I think for historic purposes, is fine, but in 2023, we're primarily focused on adaptive versus maladaptive. So even a narcissistic or immature defense like splitting can be very adaptive, right? We know that denial in certain circumstances is very adaptive, even though Valiant would contend that they're immature or even narcissistic. The opposite is true too. I mean, too much of one thing tends to not be good. We see that in our discussion this morning, even though the episode that we chose didn't necessarily demonstrate this, but Jerry Seinfeld's use of humor as a defense is considered mature by Valiant. But you ask Elaine Bennis, and it's anything but mature, right? It can be very maladaptive, and so can altruism. And if that's something that the patient, in this case, George, becomes consciously aware of, he may look to be more flexible among his defenses and trade off situations where he's usually resigned to use altruism for an alternative defense. And that might actually result in his having moved away and created a life and spend more time with his family. And again, what the plot would have looked like then. It's also something to consider. What else about George? Anything else you want to talk about? Well, I would submit that after his jumping from that bridge, and after talking with the bridge operator, we saw the reaction that the bridge operator has. That individual picks up the phone and calls 911. And now George Bailey is in front of you, who was on call with me, given his history of presentalis. So everything that unfolds in the plot up to that point becomes your HPI, which now you're signing out to me, discussing with me as you're attending on call. What are we thinking? I mean, during an emergent psychiatric assessment, respectfully, we have our psychologist saying, well, we have to focus on the altruism and maybe have him become more flexible in psychotherapy. This is an emergent psych assessment. He just attempted suicide. So, and I'm going to ask you on call, what would you like to do?
Admit him. He's intoxicated also.
Yeah, I mean, that's a concern, right? He's intoxicated and he has active suicidal ideation, status post-suicide attempt, right? Is there more to this? What else is in the HPI at this point?
He had an argument with another person, so like maybe you're not super concerned that he's a danger to others, but
Yeah, yes, right?
certainly has conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Depending on where you stand on the whole angel thing, is he hallucinating?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you're getting on call anyway. You're not going to get away by saying, oh, yeah, by the way, he's got this angel with him, his name's Clarence, who's trying to earn his wings. Remember the bridge operator's reaction to that. I mean, that's a nice barometer in terms of the countertransference that you might experience when somebody provides the same information. So in this case, you know, I think we have an episode of depression that may be severe with psychotic features. That's something to consider here, right? So safety first, because of the suicide attempt, and whatever it is, and we'll talk about this next, that we're going to employ in terms of a biopsychosocial treatment plan, we are probably going to recommend that that treatment plan be implemented at a level that is no less restrictive than an inpatient psychiatric facility. Right? Oh boy, does the plot change here, right? I mean, all of a sudden, you know, he's not going back to that bar, and I don't think Clarence ever gets his wings. Not until the sequel, anyway. So, treatment.
CBT.
CBT, okay.
SSRI.
So MDD with psychotic features. If you prescribe the antidepressant alone, what percentage of individuals get better? Clinically improved?
Less than 50%.
Yeah, 30%. Antipsychotic only, what percentage?
I think it's higher.
30%.
No.
Combination therapy, so SSRI plus antipsychotic. Well, any antidepressant, but I heard SSRI. Plus antipsychotic, now the percentage.
7?
Yeah, 70%. Yeah, so I think as far as a biopsychosocial treatment plan, specifically looking at the biological or somatic therapy, we're likely looking at combination treatment. Right? Some antidepressant plus the antipsychotic. Now, once the depression alleviates, the antipsychotic should be weaned. Right? Whether the antidepressant continues is up to the practitioner. Current APA guidelines suggest with severe cases or severe episodes of depression, and this is a severe episode, as evidenced by psychotic features and suicide attempts, that therapy, in this case the SSRI, stays on indefinitely. Right? So you can discuss that with the patient during the hospitalization, that this is probably going to be a lifelong prescription. Because any chance of recurrence is going to likely confer the same level of risk and severity. So even if you had a crystal ball and say it's only about a 1 in 72 chance, that risk is going to be too high for you. And since we really can't predict the real likelihood, we could predict, that is quantitatively, we can predict qualitatively it is likely to be as severe as. And in this case, it was a suicide attempt and psychotic features. This was a very severe case. All right, so what else do you want to do for our patient, inpatient, while he's still under your care?
Social work.
Hmm?
Social work.
Always. Yep. There's probably another therapy we have to discuss with our patient, because you told me that this combination treatment, the polypharmacy, 70% likelihood response. There's actually another treatment that has a response rate in this very situation of 90+%. Haloperidol? No.
Ketamine?
Ketamine? No.
ECT.
Hmm?
ECT.
ECT. Yeah. Lesser convulsive therapy confers a benefit of 90% in these cases. Right? And you wouldn't want to prescribe any medication, much less two, and confer those side effects, albeit with the expected benefit, without going to, or at least discussing as part of the informed consent of each of those meds, that mode of therapy that confers greater likelihood of success, 70% versus 90%, and by the way, with less side effects. So that's not a therapy you want to keep hidden from your patient. That's one you have to discuss in terms of the alternatives to care as part of the informed consent of both the antipsychotic as well as the antidepressant. Two classes of antipsychotic. Now, I'm not going to get into, well, I could. Let's say this actual case takes place in 1952, 1953. What antipsychotic are you going to recommend? Very tricky question, because there's only one.
Haldol?
Huh?
Is it Haldol?
Oh, no. It's a good guess, though. Chlorpromazine. Right, chlorpromazine. Let's take it out of context, though. That's just the historical value. You know, it's Friday night. This is fun fact around the pub tonight. So when friends are over. That said, there are two general classes of antipsychotics. What are they? Right. For the typical or conventional, first being discovered is chlorpromazine or Thorazine. The expected benefits include what?
Less psychosis,
Yeah, more specific.
reduction in hallucinations.
Good. And?
Net positive, yeah.
And what's the other positive symptom that we usually talk about? Delusions do. Delusions do. The belief that if successful, that angel will get its wings. You're going to see that resolved too. Right. The positive symptoms of psychosis are the pathological presence of something that at baseline should not be there. Hallucinations, delusions, easy examples. Other examples that are also criteria for schizophrenia as well as schizoaffective include disorganized or bizarre behavior, disorganized speech. So those count too. Right? At what risk, though? What are the potential drawbacks of prescribing, whether it's chlorpromazine in 1952 or any typical / conventional antipsychotic in George Bailey?
The extrapyramidal symptoms?
Yeah, that's a biggie, right? Yep.
NMS.
Hmm?
NMS.
NMS, yep. Right. So the easiest way to get through and navigate these potential side effects is to think about them along the lines of D2 receptor antagonism. Because while you antagonize that D2 receptor and lower dopamine in certain parts of the brain, you're going to get improvement in those positive symptoms. Where in the brain, by the way?
The limbic system, mesolimbic system.
Mesolimbic tract, mesolimbic, right? Unfortunately, the drug, any drug, does not go to that system and only that system. It's going to hit dopamine ubiquitously, meaning that you're going to get improvement, but you're also going to get side effects. And when those side effects are when that receptor binding is outside of the pyramids, we call that extrapyramidal side effects, EPS. Right? You can get, and related to that would be the hyperprolactinemia. And then you have other, just a whole grab bag of stuff that falls outside of the dopamine system. Those other side effects can best be remembered by the acronym STOMAS, S-T-O-M-A-S. I already got one of them. I heard torsades, that's the T. What are the other side effects conforming to that acronym? In no certain order.
Are there ocular defects like corneal deposits and
In Seroquel or quetiapine, that could happen. There's pigmentation that could happen. We certainly could recommend SLIT, it's with an L, lamp examinations every 6 to 12 months. But not, and Thorazine also has pigmentation as well. But beyond that, that is not necessarily a class effect.
What was the acronym you said?
Stomas?
Stoma? Metabolic changes?
Metabolic, good. S is sedation.
Orthostatic hypotension.
Perfect. And yet the A and the S remaining. Anticholinergic and seizures. Right. Generally speaking, EPS, likely, relatively less likely, stomas. Conventional versus now, not unconventional, but atypical or second generation antipsychotics. Clozaril, the first to be discovered. Expected benefits?
Better K efficiency, it's more efficacious at producing some of those positive symptoms.
It's probably equitable with the positive symptoms, but, and, everybody hear that? Okay, so it's the same effect when it comes to the positive symptoms, but unlike the conventional or first generation antipsychotic, the second generation antipsychotics do confer greater benefit in reducing what we refer to as negative symptoms that are hallmark of a pathological absence of something that at baseline should be there. Okay? This usually requires increased dopamine improvement, increased dopamine. At what level?
mesocortical?
Good. Right? So Conceptually, this is not really true, but conceptually, think of psychosis as a shunt phenomenon, especially schizophrenia, where dopamine is shunted away from the mesolimbic system to the mesocortical system. Right? So you have I said that backwards. Mesocortical to the mesolimbic. You have too high a dopamine at the mesolimbic at the expense of the mesocortical. And medication like a second generation antipsychotic reestablishes the equilibrium. Itself shunting the dopamine back to where it belongs, away from the mesolimbic, improving those positive symptoms, to the mesocortical, making up for the hypodopamine state there, and therefore improvement of the negative symptoms. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
All right. Again, conceptually it works. Whether it's exactly 100% true is, we'll discuss, or under further discussion. At what expense? All right, so fine, you get equitable efficacy. That's not right. For the positive symptoms, you have improvement of negative symptoms as well, but what are the side effects?
Parkinsonian.
Metabolic, Parkinsonian. Easy answer, same. Right? Likelihood is reversed. Right? Stomas, likely. EPS, relatively unlikely. So just reverse those. Now, how much they're reversed in terms of that gap has everything to do with specific drugs within the atypical or second generation class, but for all intents and purposes, as a class effect, just reverse those, the prevalence. Questions on this, like uber brief primer on antipsychotics? Any one of which, well, let's actually talk about this. Which one would you prescribe for George Bailey at this time, and why?
You mean back in 1947?
No. Let's say that George presents in 2020. Not only is It's a Wonderful Life a supernatural tale, but it's also now a time travel tale. So it's a sci-fi thriller too.
An atypical antipsychotic, second generation, so olanzapine.
Fine, olanzapine, okay? So we have our patient olanzapine. Why are we going with olanzapine in this case? You guys are all pointing in now.
Yeah.
It's PO, you take it at home.
Okay, that's fair. They're all PO though. Generally speaking, the older the individual is, the more likely you may choose the conventional or typical agent. A way to start out in your little algorithm would be to think this through. If you're older or elderly, the benefits you're going to get are comparable. However, the side effects for the typical or conventional will be EPS. And for those that are most concerning, especially tardive dyskinesia, it's a dose-dependent effect, I mean cumulative dose effect, meaning dose multiplied by duration. And you're, as a prescriber, less concerned when you're 60, 70, and then even 80 because of that cumulative dose not really being that meaningful or as meaningful. Right? So the older you are, think conventional. By the way, the older you are, the more susceptible you will be to the stomas, which you should avoid and will avoid with the prescribing of that typical agent, like haloperidol. Right? The complete opposite is true for those that are younger. Right? If George Bailey were 20 with his first psychotic break, I'm not so sure you'd feel comfortable prescribing a medication like Haldol because of that cumulative dose effect. He'll have EPS by the time he's 25. Right? All of a sudden, that's a concern. Or I should say between 25 and 30. On the other hand, with regard to those side effects, stomas, anticholinergic side effects, orthostatic hypotension, you're not nearly as concerned about George Bailey at 20 years of age falling and that morbidity that he can incur versus George Bailey when he's 65, 75, or 80. Right? So the younger you are, I want you to think atypical. Unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately for us, George is cast at or around the time that he sees Clarence, I guess in his early 30s. So we'll call that young. So you're right, Olanzapine is a good selection here. I mean, they look 60. I mean, I think the actor always looked the same age, even when he was up at the Oscars at like 80-something years of age. It was great. Nonetheless, he's cast as someone who is youngish. So I think you're right. Olanzapine would fit well here. Antidepressants. Well, before we go there, any other thoughts, questions about antipsychotics? All right, antidepressants. Remember, we said we have to go with polypharmacy, right? We want that 70% response rate because there is no ECT center around to make that referral to get him that definitive treatment. So the best we can do for our patient today is start him on a regimen of antidepressant and antipsychotic. So antidepressant. First, second, and third line agents. So third line first. Give me an example of a third line agent.
MAOI inhibitors?
I heard it real loud.
MAO inhibitors?
Perfect. Right? Monoamine oxidase inhibitors are the MAOI or your third line agents. These are medications that hit both the catecholamines as well as the indoleamine serotonin. Right? Otherwise referred to as having a quote-unquote dirty mechanism of action. Unfortunately, fortunately first. Fortunately, they are as effective as any other medication that you could prescribe for depression. Unfortunately, their side effects classify them or result in their being classified as third-line agents. Right. What side effects am I talking about? Yeah. When this medication is combined with another sympathomimetic, you can have an abrupt rise in blood pressure with signs of end organ damage, otherwise known as the hypertensive crisis or the hypertensive emergency. Right? The sympathomimetic can be prescribed, right? So it can be Wellbutrin or bupropion. It could be recreational, cocaine. It could be over the counter. It could be in food, tyramine. So you really do have to have an in-depth discussion with your patient in terms of what they're ingesting, recreationally, prescription, or even food. Another side effect or medication interaction that you're concerned about.
Serotonin.
Yeah. When this medication is combined not with another sympathomimetic, but instead another serotonergic agent, you can get the serotonin syndrome, which usually manifests as a triad, right? Delirium, autonomic instability, and upper motor neuron signs, right? Myoclonus, hyper, HYPER, reflexia. If you want to build that into a tetralogy or a tetrad, you can include GI disturbance too. Second line agent. They're your TCAs. Similar mechanism of action as the MAOIs, in as much as the neurotransmitters that they affect, the way they affect them is different. Right? They don't inhibit monoamine oxidase. They don't inhibit that enzyme that breaks down the catecholamines. They actually have direct receptor affinity. Right? But they do hit the catecholamines as well as the indoleamine, serotonin. Right? So same neurotransmitter profile, albeit different mechanism. Similar to the MAOI medications, the TCAs are as effective as anything you can prescribe, but their side effects, while not as severe as the MAOI, are severe enough to classify them as second-line agents. Right? And this one will be simple for you. What are the side effects as a class of those TCAs?
Prolonged QT syndrome.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that also stomas. And you do, right? That's what you're about to tell me, right? Yeah. Same exact side effect, I mean, not exact, but same side effect profile, stomas. And then everything else that you discuss, hear about, or otherwise learn during a psychiatry clerkship are likely to be first-line agents. So, first-line agents primarily hit serotonin syndrome versus the non-serotonin, or not the serotonin syndrome, the serotonin receptors or pathways versus the non-serotonin pathway. Non-serotonin pathway would include norepinephrine and dopamine. And then, of course, you have medications that hit both, right? Often referred to as the atypical antidepressants. So again, serotonergic, non-serotonergic, both. Choose one for George Bailey to go along with the olanzapine that you already have in mind. Sertraline, okay. So we're going with a combination of sertraline and olanzapine. All right, why sertraline?
I think out of the SSRIs, isn't it safer cardiac-wise? For the QTC?
I'd have to look that up. It probably does have a lower risk of QTC prolongation. Generally speaking, the reason to start this individual on a SSRI versus a non-SSRI or a non-serotonergic or even a combined agent should be directed or influenced by additional information that you obtain during a routine psychiatric evaluation. So during your psych eval, let's say he rules in for depression, then yes, that includes hopelessness and suicidality or suicidal ideation, right? But let's say there's others too, right? Just for the sake of ruling in. What other aspects of the routine psychiatric evaluation might support the use of an SSRI here? And what I mean is that they are signs of serotonergic deficiency beyond depression itself.
That's motivation
Maybe.
Restlessness.
Yeah, restlessness and anxiety. Anxiety is a serotonergic phenomenon too, which is why a lot of the SSRIs have an alternate indication through the FDA for multiple anxiety disorders. Do you think George Bailey is anxious? I get a yes. All right, so choosing the SSRI in this case is likely a good idea. And it's not necessarily because of that other FDA approval. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the fact that anxiety, along with depression, is a serotonergic phenomenon in general. So choosing bupropion would have been a bad idea here, at least where we are in the conversation at this point. Okay. There's 1 or 1.5 additional pieces of information that may support the prescribing of a serotonergic agent in this case, such as the sertraline. History of suicide attempt, which of course is central to this movie. This comes up on shelf exams. What metabolite has been found to be at reduced levels of the CSF, or in CSF, of individuals who have completed suicide?
5-HIAA.
Right. And that is true, and that's the single best answer on your shelf exam. What that also tells us is that individuals who attempt suicide have low serotonin levels. So the Wellbutrin is not likely to address that. I mean, this person has Siggy caps. So they're telling you, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin is wrong, doc, correct it. There's an imbalance, correct it. And if they also give you evidence of history of suicide attempt, anxiety, you're saying, my primary focus is going to be in that dopamine norepinephrine system, and that'll be in lieu of serotonin. You missed it. You missed the other signals the individual was providing you to say, no, this is a serotonin thing for me. Okay. Now, the other thing to consider here is sleep. Right? Sleep is a serotonergic phenomenon. There's serotonin in sleep function. And I mean, in a perfect world, we would be able to evaluate sleep outside of the major depressive episode, because any major depressive episode can include insomnia. right? It's the S in Siggy caps, sleep. When a person tells you, like George, I've had Siggy caps since that money went missing, but I've had difficulty sleeping for the past 3 years, that checks the box. Right, and then in addition to the suicide attempt, in addition to the anxiety, looks like the sertraline is a wonderful choice. Okay. I don't know if George rules in for a sleep disturbance here, though, in that respect, but 2 out of 3, as one musician once said, ain't bad. More discussion, though. What about the norepinephrine dopamine system? Just because you're ruling in 2 out of 3 for serotonin doesn't mean you wouldn't do the same when it comes to a medication like bupropion, which is a norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So this individual's Siggy caps could also be affected by a dysregulation of those catecholamines as well. And the information provided you by George Bailey in this movie during your psychiatric evaluation may support that both dopamine and norepinephrine do have a role here. So what information are you looking for? And I'll give you a hint. It's not a history of suicide attempt or anxiety.
Doesn't it historically increase like irritability as well, bupropion?
Could be irritability, agitation.
Already pretty irritable. So.
He's got irritable affect. Tobacco use disorder. Alcohol use disorder. Drug use. Obesity. And then outside of the major depressive episode, difficulty concentrating. Okay, so we'll treat it similar to the way we addressed insomnia when we discussed the serotonin. Again, George tells you for X number of weeks I've been depressed incident to that money having gone missing, but I've had difficulty concentrating ever since I was in grade school. Right, that checks the box. With regard to any of those additional signs of dopamine/norepinephrine deficiency or dysregulation, does George rule in? He's not obese. Did he smoke in this movie?
He smoked a cigar at one point with Mr. Potter.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know if he does that or
Yeah, I'm not sure that's gonna buy it for us.
Drinks, it sounds like.
He drinks?
I don't remember
Stressed
exactly how
that
much.
much.
Yeah.
We only saw him intoxicated the one time too.
Yeah.
After a major stressor.
I don't know how much.
Now, if you were to tell me, there's some evidence here, and since we don't have access to collateral information, why don't we just play it safe? Say that he is ruling in, just to play it safe, and go with a combined agent like Cymbalta, duloxetine, or maybe venlafaxine, Effexor, you'd be right. That's perfectly reasonable to do. On the other hand, if we do call up George's mom and dad, his brother, Frank, and they say, no, there's no evidence of alcohol use disorder or even excessive alcohol use. And he has an occasional cigar, once, maybe twice a year. If you came back to me and said, let's just go with the sertraline in lieu of a combined agent, you'd be right there too. So you can see, but you see the logic and the way you formulate which medication to choose here, right? And ultimately, what medical regimen that is added to the olanzapine we would go with in this case of psychotic depression. What questions do we have with regard to the pharmacotherapy for George Bailey? All right. Any other characters you'd like to discuss? We're about 10 minutes left.
Scrooge, I forget Mr. Potter.
Mr. Potter.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm running through the correct diagnosis, but colloquially I'd say he's a bit narcissistic in the way he carries himself and how he expects to be treated.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of at that narcissist or narcissistic personality disorder / antisocial personality kind of interface, because I wouldn't necessarily readily dismiss his blatant disregard for others' rights. Right? He doesn't, so yes, I think he believes he's special, but I also believe that he thinks little of others too. So he might be at that interface, and these illnesses tend to cluster together, which is exactly why they're classified as, in this case, cluster B personality disorders. So there's definitely an element of that. And again, We could talk about this biopsychosocially. Again, Mr. Potter, kind of like young Sheldon, growing up as its own spinoff would be very interesting. In terms of like a Netflix, like a holiday kind of series to put together. Nonetheless, we could also talk about this from a predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating perspective as well. And again, I would implore you to do both simultaneously in that 3x3 rubric. We, unfortunately, when we come into the story, we're largely looking at what is perpetuating the behavior. And I think the wealth gained by indiscriminately destroying people's lives and building on their land and developing is that perpetuating social factor.
And I think while he never admitted, his advancing age and poor health are also factors that I think like he put on his legacy.
Yeah, yeah. And unlike George and the Baileys in general, I don't know anything about his son, his wife. We don't hear about them at all, which, again, during a psychiatric interview, during any H&P, we would ask, right? Your partner, your family, because there's nothing there. Right? And I suspect that he is single, and this is all he has. You know, when people get to that age, and we could talk a little bit about Erik Erikson if we have time, but when they get to that age and you're looking at ego integrity, what you're gonna leave the world with, if it's not your family, it better be something. So if there's any chance that he would look back and say, you know, I wish I would have done this over, that's gonna come with a horrific consequence, right? Because if individuals do not achieve ego integrity at Mr. Potter's age, the alternative is despair. So severe depression as a result, which again would parallel him wonderfully with George. In the 5 minutes we have left, any final thoughts? Or Mr. Gower, I think, is fairly straightforward alcohol use disorder. In terms of, you know, one theory or one, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word right now. One plane.
I feel like in the reality where George didn't help him, he could potentially relate to like complex grief disorder too, for the loss of his son and like
Oh, yeah.
his loss.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a progression there.
Yeah.
Again, right, so I think there was bereavement, which is completely within normal limits. Bereavement is not even considered syndromal. It's a grief reaction that may, at least on shelf exams, follow 5 stages. When it becomes clinically significant, that clinical significance is usually hallmarked not only with severity of symptoms, that is qualitative assessment, but quantitatively in terms of duration, resulting in the term of persisting complex bereavement disorder. Right, once you put the D at the end of it, it means it's clinically significant and readily distinguishes this condition, this syndrome, with quote-unquote normal bereavement. Individuals with persistent complex bereavement disorder are at very high risk for developing depression. And people who have depression that is not treated have further risk of having that depression go to a severe stage and perhaps even severe with psychotic features. Right. So we could actually see a progression here in Mr. Gower and ultimately resulting in his use, perhaps self-medicating with alcohol. Final thoughts? Did I answer your question now as to why we watch this movie? All right, we'll leave it there. As soon as this afternoon, later on this afternoon perhaps, by latest I promise tomorrow, I will post on Twitter what the next week's movie will be. Cool. I take it from there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.